What if you could peel back the layers of time and step directly into the medieval world? Picture this. Your fingers brush against a rusted iron latch hidden beneath centuries of dirt, and with one tug, a long sealed door creaks open, revealing a chamber frozen in time. Inside, the air is thick with dust and mystery. A knight's sword lies abandoned on a stone slab, its hilt encrusted with gemstones that still catch the faintest light. Nearby, a stack of parchment, brittle with age, holds secrets scribbled in ink that hasn't faded despite the passage of 800 years. This isn't just a scene from a movie, it's the reality archaeologists face when they uncover the astonishing treasures buried beneath medieval ruins and forgotten graves. Every discovery they make is like a whisper from the past, a voice that refuses to be silenced. Imagine holding a ring worn by a medieval noblewoman, its intricate engravings telling a story of love, power, or perhaps betrayal. Or standing over the skeletal remains of a warrior, his bones marked by battles fought and lost, yet his burial site adorned with honors that defy our assumptions about his time. These aren't just artifacts, they're time capsules, each one offering a piece of a puzzle that changes how we see history. From lost cities swallowed by the earth to hidden hoards of gold deliberately buried in times of war, every find forces us to rethink what we know about the medieval world and the people who shaped it. And here's the thing, these discoveries aren't just for historians. They're for anyone who's ever wondered about the lives of those who came before us. How did they live? What did they fear? What dreams did they bury with them? Today, we're going to explore 30 of the most startling finds ever pulled from medieval ruins and burial sites, each one a window into a past that's far more complex, vibrant, and surprising than you might expect. Some will make you question everything you thought you knew. Others will leave you in awe of the craftsmanship, resilience, and sheer humanity of those who walked this earth centuries ago. So settle in, because history is about to get a lot more personal. Beneath the bustling streets of modern London lies a silent witness to one of history's darkest chapters. In 2013, construction workers near Charterhouse Square stumbled upon a haunting sight, a mass grave, its earth packed with skeletons stacked 5 deep. These weren't just any remains, they were victims of the Black Death, the relentless plague that swept through Europe in the 14th century, wiping out nearly half of London's population. The bones told a story science could finally decipher. Fractures on ribs and limbs hinted at the agony of sudden, brutal deaths, while DNA extracted from tooth pulp revealed the unmistakable signature of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind the nightmare. But what shocked researchers most wasn't just the scale of the burial, it was the care hidden beneath the tragedy. Unlike popular depictions of plague pits as chaotic dumping grounds, these bodies were laid in orderly rows, some even wrapped in linen shrouds. Someone had taken pains to bury them with dignity despite the terror unfolding above ground. This wasn't a society collapsing into anarchy. It was a community clinging to humanity amid unimaginable loss. The grave's location, just outside the city walls, also revealed medieval London's grim logistics. Victims were quietly moved beyond the boundaries of the living, yet still close enough for prayers to follow. The discovery shattered long-held assumptions. For centuries, historians believed the plague spread primarily through rat-borne fleas, but the positioning of these bodies suggested another horrifying possibility: human-to-human transmission, a deadly pneumonic form of the disease that could leap between victims with just a cough. This single pit became a time capsule of resilience, showing how medieval people adapted even as death reshaped their world. The artifacts buried alongside the dead, a child's leather shoe, a pilgrim's badge, whisper of lives interrupted, not erased. Today, these bones don't just map the path of a pandemic. They remind us that even in the face of devastation, compassion leaves its mark. For over 100 years, archaeologists were convinced they knew exactly who lay in the lavish Viking grave at Birka, Sweden. Buried with a sword, an axe, arrows, and even strategy gaming pieces, this was clearly the tomb of a high-ranking warrior, and since warriors were men, the skeleton had to be male. That assumption went unchallenged until modern science stepped in. DNA analysis revealed something astonishing. This fearsome fighter wasn't a man at all. The bones belonged to a woman, shattering centuries of stereotypes about Viking society. Her grave wasn't just stocked with weapons, it was a statement. 2 shields lay beside her, along with armor-piercing arrows and the remains of 2 horses, a burial fit for a military leader. The gaming pieces used for planning battle tactics suggested a sharp strategic mind. This wasn't some symbolic gesture. The evidence pointed to a life spent in the thick of warfare. Yet for generations, researchers explained away similar finds by claiming women were buried with weapons as ritual offerings or heirlooms. The Birka warrior forced them to confront a far more radical idea, that Viking women could wield power on the battlefield as fiercely as any man. The discovery ignited fiery debates. Some scholars clung to old narratives, arguing she might have been an exception, but others pointed to sagas and texts hinting at shield maidens, women who fought alongside men. Suddenly, folklore seemed less like myth and more like history. What's striking isn't just that this woman was a warrior, but that her community honored her as one. The care taken with her burial, the wealth of her grave goods, it all signaled respect. This wasn't a secret or a scandal, it was normal for her world. Technology played a quiet but revolutionary role here. Without DNA testing, her story might have stayed buried forever, another casualty of historical bias. Now she's rewriting textbooks, proving that Viking society was far more complex than we imagined. It's not just about gender, it's about recognizing how often we project modern assumptions onto the past. The Birka warrior doesn't just represent a single woman's life, she's a reminder that history is full of surprises, waiting for us to look closer. Deep in the rolling hills of Wales, where sheep now graze peacefully, the earth hides the bones of a city that once rivaled London in size and importance. Trellech, a medieval powerhouse, thrived in the 13th century with a population soaring into the thousands, only to vanish so completely that its very existence became legend. For centuries, historians debated its location until a retired salesman named Stuart Wilson, armed with little more than a hunch and a shovel, began digging in a farmer's field. What he uncovered would rewrite Welsh history. The ground gave up its secret slowly, first a scattering of pottery shards, then the unmistakable outline of stone foundations. Streets emerged, lined with the remnants of homes, workshops, and even a massive moat, proof this was no ordinary village but a carefully planned urban center. The artifacts told a vivid story. Fragments of French glass and Spanish pottery hinted at trade routes stretching across Europe, while finely crafted tools suggested skilled metalworkers and leather artisans. This wasn't just a settlement, it was a hub of industry and commerce, a place where wealth and ambition converged. Yet the most haunting question lingers: why did Trellech fall? Unlike cities destroyed by war or natural disaster, this one seems to have slipped away quietly. Some point to political turmoil. The Welsh uprising against English rule in the late 13th century left many towns in ruins. Others suspect the Black Death, which swept through Britain decades later, emptying entire communities. But Trellech's decline feels different, almost deliberate. The moat, once a symbol of prosperity, may hold a clue. As archaeologists traced its path, they found evidence it had been filled in, not by collapse but by human hands. Was this a city dismantling itself, stone by stone, as its people scattered? The rediscovery of Trelech does more than fill a gap on old maps. It challenges our assumptions about medieval life. We often picture the Middle Ages as a time of isolated villages and grim fortresses, but here was a place of bustling streets and cosmopolitan tastes. Its fate also serves as a humbling reminder. No civilization, no matter how prosperous, is immune to time's erasure. Today, visitors can walk those long-buried lanes, tracing fingers over stones last touched by hands 7 centuries gone. The wind still carries echoes of hammers on anvils, merchants haggling in crowded squares, a city that refused to be forgotten. Hidden beneath the flagstones of Winchester Cathedral for nearly 1,000 years, a humble lead container no larger than a teacup held secrets that would make medieval pilgrims weep with reverence. When archaeologists pried it open, they didn't find gold or jewels instead. They uncovered fragments of yellowed bone and brittle cloth, carefully wrapped like sacred offerings. To modern eyes, these might seem ordinary, even unremarkable. But in the Middle Ages, these were treasures beyond price, relics believed to carry the spiritual power of saints, apostles, or even Christ himself. The craftsmanship of the reliquary tells its own story. Though made of simple lead, its surfaces were etched with intricate crosses and Latin inscriptions, each stroke of the artisan's tool a testament to devotion. This wasn't just storage, it was a vessel designed to honor what medieval people saw as a direct link to the divine. The relics inside, likely swatches of a saint's robe or slivers of a martyr's bones, were more than symbols. They were thought to radiate holiness, capable of healing the sick, shielding communities from disaster, or even opening gates to heaven. What's fascinating isn't just the relics themselves, but what they reveal about medieval minds. Imagine living in a world where heaven felt tangibly close, where a scrap of fabric could be a bridge between earth and eternity. Pilgrims would travel hundreds of miles to glimpse such objects, believing their very presence could absolve sins or cure ailments. The Winchester Reliquary wasn't just a container, it was a battery of faith, charged with the hopes and fears of generations. Yet these relics also hint at a darker truth: the hunger for connection could be exploited. The Middle Ages saw a booming trade in counterfeit relics, with merchants passing off animal bones as saintly remains or weaving tall tales to attract pilgrims' coins. Even the faithful sometimes questioned authenticity, like the monk who joked that enough splinters of the true cross existed to build a ship. But the Winchester relics, carefully preserved in their cathedral setting, likely held undisputed reverence. Their survival suggests they were hidden not from thieves, but from reformers who centuries later would smash such objects as idolatrous. Today, the reliquary forces us to confront a world where the spiritual and physical were deeply entwined. These fragments weren't just keepsakes, they were threads in a vast tapestry of belief that shaped laws, wars, and daily life. A king might swear oaths on relics in court. A village might parade them through fields to bless the harvest. In an era before science could explain storms or sickness, these objects offered control over the uncontrollable. The Winchester Reliquary doesn't just hold bones and cloth. It holds the heartbeat of an age where heaven was always just a touch away. In a quiet Polish graveyard near the town of Drosko, archaeologists unearthed bones that told a story darker than any fairy tale. 6 skeletons lay in their graves with sickles pressed against their throats, their jaws weighted down by heavy stones, precautions taken not to honor the dead, but to imprison them. These weren't ordinary burials, they were medieval anti-vampire measures, physical manifestations of a terror that once gripped entire villages. The details are chilling. The sickles, typically farming tools, were positioned so that any attempt to rise would decapitate the corpse. Stones under the chins prevented the dead from opening their mouths, believed to stop them from feeding on the living. These weren't haphazard rituals, they were calculated acts of fear. But who were these so-called vampires? Forensic science offered a surprising answer. Dental analysis and bone isotopes revealed many were outsiders, possibly migrants or travelers with distinct diets or origins. Some showed signs of gruesome death, skull fractures, untreated diseases marking them as victims twice over, first of misfortune, then of superstition. What's most revealing isn't just the burials themselves, but the context behind them. The 14th and 15th centuries were eras of upheaval in Poland. Waves of plague, crop failures, and warfare left communities desperate for explanations. When strangers died under strange circumstances, fear transformed them into scapegoats. A traveler coughing blood might be labeled a vampire, draining the life from others. A woman surviving childbirth while others perished could be accused of witchcraft. These burials weren't about monsters, they were about control. In a world without germ theory, blaming the undead for epidemics gave people a way to fight back, even if that meant mutilating graves. Yet there's haunting humanity here too. The care taken to neutralize these individuals suggests genuine belief, not just cruelty. To medieval Poles, the sickle wasn't just a restraint, it was protection for grieving families. Modern archaeology has even found cases where vampire burials were later revisited, stones rearranged as if to check the corpse's obedience. This was a dialogue with fear, repeated across generations. These graves force us to confront how easily fear distorts reality. The so-called vampires were likely just the marginalized, the poor, the sick, the different, transformed by folklore into threats. Today, their skeletons serve as a stark reminder. When societies face the unknown, the line between myth and monster is often drawn in haste. On a windswept beach in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, a local farmer digging for peat in 1831 struck something far more extraordinary than fuel: a hoard of 93 chess pieces, each one a miniature masterpiece carved from walrus ivory and whale tooth. The Lewis Chessmen, as they'd come to be known, weren't just game pieces, they were frozen moments of medieval life, their faces contorted in expressions ranging from regal dignity to comic despair. One berserker knight gnaws his shield in battle frenzy, while a queen rests her cheek on her hand, as if weary of ruling. But their artistry raises a tantalizing question. How did these exquisite pieces, steeped in Norse design, end up buried in the Scottish sands? The clues lie in the craftsmanship. The intricate interlacing patterns on the thrones, the exaggerated facial features, they all point to 12th century Norway, where Viking artisans had perfected the art of ivory carving. Some historians believe the chessmen were the work of a single workshop, possibly in Trondheim, a bustling hub of trade and artistry. This wasn't just a set, it was a luxury export, likely destined for a wealthy noble or merchant who valued both strategy and status. The inclusion of bishops, their mitres carefully detailed, hints at the Christianization of Scandinavia, where old pagan motifs now shared space with symbols of the new faith. Yet the mystery of their burial deepens. Were they hidden by a merchant fearing theft, stashed during a storm by a trader forced to lighten his ship's load? Or perhaps lost in a shipwreck, their owner never returning to claim them? The most compelling theory ties them to the political chaos of the Norse-controlled Isles. In the 12th century, the Outer Hebrides were a contested frontier between Norway and Scotland. A fleeing noble might have buried his treasures, hoping to retrieve them once the fighting ended, a hope that, for someone, went unfulfilled. What makes the chessmen truly remarkable isn't just their origins, but what they reveal about medieval connections. Chess itself was a traveler, having journeyed from India through the Islamic world to Europe. The Lewis pieces, with their Islamic-inspired abstract designs evolving into human figures, mirror this cultural odyssey. They weren't just toys, they were diplomatic tools, teaching noble strategy and patience. The set's multiple pieces suggest it wasn't for solitary play, but for a community, perhaps even a tavern, where games doubled as social theater. Today, the chessmen are more than artifacts. They're a metaphor for the Middle Ages itself, a time often painted as dark and isolated, yet in reality, humming with exchange. Each piece carries whispers of Arctic hunters supplying ivory, Norse carvers adapting foreign motifs, Scottish beaches cradling lost treasures. When you look into the wide-eyed stare of a Lewis rook, you're not just seeing a game piece, you're seeing a world far more interconnected than we often imagine. The peat bogs of Denmark have a way of keeping secrets until they don't. In 1952, workers cutting peat near the village of Grobel uncovered something that made their blood run cold. A man's body, so perfectly preserved it looked as though he'd died yesterday. His skin was leathery and stained dark by the bog's tannins, his hair still clinging to his scalp in rusty tufts. But the most haunting detail, his fingertips bore ridges and whorls so intact, police could have taken his fingerprints. This was the Grobel man, a 2,000-year-old sacrifice whose violent end and eerie preservation offer a visceral glimpse into the spiritual world of Iron Age Europe. Forensic science peeled back the layers of his story with chilling precision. The cause of death was unmistakable, a single, deep slash across the throat, clean enough to sever his windpipe but deliberate enough to suggest ceremony, not chaos. His body showed no defensive wounds. He hadn't fought back. This wasn't murder, it was ritual. The position of his limbs, carefully arranged, hinted at a community's collective hand in his fate. Even more telling was his stomach contents, a last meal of coarse gruel made from weeds and wild seeds, the kind eaten only in times of desperation. Was he a volunteer, giving himself to the gods to end a famine? A criminal offered as penance, or an outsider, chosen precisely because he wasn't one of them? The bog itself played a role in the mystery. These waterlogged, oxygen-poor environments act like natural time capsules, slowing decay to a crawl. But the Iron Age people who placed him there knew something modern science only later confirmed. Bogs have a peculiar chemistry that preserves flesh while dissolving bone, leaving behind a hauntingly lifelike shell. To them, the bog wasn't just a grave, it was a threshold between worlds, a place where the earth could swallow sacrifices whole and keep them suspended between life and death. What makes the Grobel man so compelling isn't just his preservation, but what he represents. His death wasn't random violence, it was a transaction. In a world where crops failed, storms raged, and disease struck without reason, sacrifice was a form of control. Offer a life, and the gods might spare the village. His gruel-stained teeth and calloused hands tell us he was no noble, but an ordinary man whose body became a bridge between the human and the divine. Yet there's a paradox here. The same bog that preserved him also distorted him. Over centuries, the acidic water shrank his skin, giving his face a grimace he never wore in life. Early reconstructions turned him into a monstrous figure, fueling sensational tales of bog people as cursed or evil. Only later research revealed the truth. He was likely someone's son, someone's neighbor, a man who walked into the bog knowing, or perhaps not knowing, he wouldn't walk out. Today, his leathery form lies in a museum, a silent witness to a belief system that saw brutality as sacred. But the Grobel man isn't just a relic of superstition. He's a mirror. In an age of climate crises and pandemics, we still grapple with the same existential fears that drove his sacrifice. The difference is we don't slit throats, we stockpile vaccines, ration water, scan the skies for storms. His story forces us to ask, when survival hangs in the balance, what lines would we cross? And 2,000 years from now, what will our own rituals say about us? Metal gleamed in the English sunlight one July afternoon in 2009, when a hobbyist with a metal detector swept his device over a field in Staffordshire and heard a sound that would rewrite history. Buried just beneath the soil lay a fortune in gold, not coins or jewelry, but something far more personal, the battle-worn decorations of warriors. The Staffordshire hoard, as it came to be known, wasn't just treasure, it was a shattered mosaic of 7th century power, faith, and war, its fragments whispering of a time when England's very identity hung in the balance. What makes this hoard extraordinary isn't just its sheer volume, over 3,500 pieces, most no larger than a thumb, but what those pieces represent. These were the fittings of swords, the pride of Anglo-Saxon warlords, intricate gold bands once wrapped around hilts, their surfaces alive with swirling patterns so fine they could only have been carved by masters. Cloak clasps studded with garnets, each stone cut and polished to catch the light like drops of blood, crosses bent and broken, their arms twisted as if torn free in haste. This wasn't wealth stored for safekeeping, it was wealth taken out of circulation deliberately, stripped from the tools of war and status. The craftsmanship defies belief. Microscopic analysis reveals garnets imported from as far away as India or Sri Lanka, their journey spanning continents to adorn the weapons of elites. The gold itself, alloyed with precise amounts of silver, glows with a warmth modern metals lack, but the real marvel is the filigree threads of gold thinner than hairs, twisted into impossibly tight spirals and soldered without modern tools. These artisans didn't just decorate objects, they turned metal into poetry. Yet the hoard's burial is a riddle wrapped in guilt. Why bury such riches in a nondescript field, far from any known settlement? The prevailing theory points to the brutal wars between the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Mercia and Northumbria. In the 7th century, this region was a battleground where kings rose and fell with terrifying speed. Could a defeated warlord have hidden his plundered trophies, hoping to reclaim them after victory, a hope that never came? Or was this a sacrificial offering, gold given to the gods in exchange for protection or favor? The bent crosses hint at ritual destruction, a deliberate deconsecration meant to release their spiritual power into the earth. What's most striking is what's missing. There are no coins, no everyday items, just the regalia of warriors and clergy. This wasn't a random collection. It was a targeted assemblage of power symbols, perhaps even a deliberate act of erasure. By burying these objects, someone wasn't just hiding wealth. They were removing the visible markers of an enemy's authority. The hoard forces us to confront how deeply Anglo-Saxon culture tied identity to objects. A sword wasn't just a weapon, it was a lineage, its fittings passed down generations. To break and bury them was to sever a dynasty's roots. Today, the Staffordshire hoard does more than dazzle, it redefines. Before its discovery, historians pictured 7th century England as a backwater, its art crude compared to Byzantium or Rome. But this gold reveals a society with global connections, technical sophistication, and an aesthetic vision that rivals any medieval culture. The garnets alone speak of trade networks stretching thousands of miles, while the designs fuse Germanic, Celtic, and Christian motifs into something wholly new. Yet for all its brilliance, the hoard remains an open wound. We don't know who buried it or why. We only know that someone, in a moment of desperation or devotion, pressed these fragments into the earth and walked away. The field kept its secret for 13 centuries, until a beep in the dirt reminded us how much history still waits, glittering just beneath our feet. Beneath the quiet fields of Lilliendal, Denmark, archaeologists uncovered a grave that stopped them mid-dig, not because of gold or weapons, but because of the way the body lay. The skeleton, belonging to a woman, was buried face down, her hands twisted beneath her, as if the earth itself had turned against her. This wasn't an accident or a hasty wartime burial. In medieval Europe, burying someone prone was a deliberate act, reserved for those believed to be so dangerous in life that even death couldn't contain their threat. She was, in all likelihood, accused of witchcraft. The bones told a story of hardship long before her grim burial. Her spine showed signs of years of backbreaking labor, the kind that would have left her hunched and aching. Tooth enamel bore the faint lines of childhood malnutrition, suggesting a life that began with scarcity and never fully escaped it. Here was someone who had struggled at the margins of society, perhaps a poor farmer's wife, a healer with knowledge of herbs, or simply a woman who didn't conform. In another time, her suffering might have earned sympathy, but in an era haunted by fear of the supernatural, it made her a target. What's chilling isn't just the burial itself, but what it reveals about how easily suspicion could turn lethal. Medieval communities lived under constant threat: crop failures, disease, unexplained death, and with no scientific explanations, the blame often fell on those who were different. A woman with a sharp tongue might be accused of cursing livestock. A recluse who collected medicinal plants could be labeled a poisoner. Once whispers started, they rarely ended without bloodshed. The Lilliendal woman's face-down burial wasn't just punishment, it was a precaution. People believed witches could claw their way out of graves, so burying them prone ensured they'd dig deeper into hell instead. Yet there's heartbreaking duality here. The same communities that feared witches also relied on them. Midwives delivered babies with herbal pain relief. Cunning folk cured ailments with remedies passed down through generations. The line between healer and witch was often just a matter of perception, helpful until something went wrong. The Lilliendal woman might have once been sought after for her knowledge, only to be turned on when a child fell ill or a storm destroyed a harvest. Modern science can't tell us if she was truly accused of witchcraft, but the context speaks volumes. Nearby graves from the same period hold men and women buried normally, their bodies at rest. Hers is an outlier, a physical manifestation of fear. Unlike the so-called vampires of Poland, who were feared as undead predators, her treatment suggests something more intimate, a betrayal by her own community. The Lilliendal witch isn't just a relic of superstition, she's a mirror. Her story echoes in modern scapegoating, where fear still transforms the marginalized into monsters. The details change. Instead of blaming witches for spoiled milk, we blame outsiders for economic woes, but the pattern remains. Her grave forces us to ask, who do we push face down into the dirt today? And what future archaeologists will uncover the evidence of our own fears? Off the coast of Suffolk, England, the North Sea whispers the name of a city that no longer exists. Dunwich, once a bustling medieval port rivaling London in size and wealth, now lies in pieces beneath the waves, a ghost town swallowed whole by the relentless hunger of erosion and storm surges. For centuries, its fate lived only in local legends. Fishermen swore they could hear church bells ringing beneath the water on stormy nights. Then, in 2008, sonar scans revealed something extraordinary. Beneath layers of silt and sand, the outlines of streets, buildings, and even the towering walls of a Franciscan monastery emerged from the darkness, frozen in their final moments before the sea took them. The scale of the discovery stunned historians. Medieval records described Dunwich as a powerhouse home to 18 churches, bustling markets, and a harbor teeming with ships. But the underwater maps painted a hauntingly precise picture of its demise. The ruins weren't scattered randomly. They followed the grid of a thriving city abruptly interrupted. One building's foundation showed half its stones ripped away mid-wall, as if the sea had snatched them in a single gulp. The monastery's footprint, eerily intact, still faced east toward the rising sun, though no light had touched its altar in 700 years. These weren't just ruins, they were a time capsule of urban life frozen at the instant of catastrophe. Dunwich's downfall wasn't sudden, it was death by 1,000 cuts. Archive records revealed desperate attempts to hold back the sea, taxes levied to fund seawalls, petitions to kings for aid, even the dismantling of buildings to salvage stone for barriers. But the storms kept coming, each one gnawing another chunk from the coastline. By the 14th century, entire neighborhoods vanished overnight. The final blow came in 1286, when a monstrous tempest collapsed the cliffs beneath the city's heart, sending homes, churches, and hundreds of souls into the abyss. What's chilling isn't just the loss, but the denial that preceded it. Even as the coastline retreated, Dunwich's leaders kept rebuilding near the cliffs, convinced their wealth and faith could defy nature's wrath. Parallels to modern climate change are impossible to ignore. Dunwich didn't fall because its people were ignorant, they understood the threat. They simply believed they could outmaneuver it. Sound familiar today as rising seas lap at coastal cities from Miami to Mumbai? Dunwich's bones serve as a grim lesson in the cost of hubris. The difference is scale. Where medieval England lost one city to localized erosion, we face the potential collapse of hundreds. Yet there's poetry in Dunwich's ruins. The same currents that devoured the city also preserved its memory, cradling its stones in the seabed until technology could retrieve their stories. Archaeologists have recovered everything from everyday pottery to a knight's tombstone, its inscription still legible after centuries underwater. These artifacts don't just document a city's death, they celebrate its life. The merchants who walked these streets, the monks who chanted in these chapels, the children who played where fish now dart between broken walls. The most poignant find, fragments of stained glass from the lost Church of All Saints, their colors still vibrant. When held to the light, they glow as brightly as they did in the 13th century, a fleeting glimpse of the beauty Dunwich once was, and a silent warning of what happens when we mistake permanence for invincibility. In the shadow of York Minster, where the echoes of Viking raids still seem to linger, a construction crew digging a drainage ditch in 1984 struck metal, but not the ordinary kind. What emerged from the mud was a masterpiece of Anglo-Saxon craftsmanship. The York helmet, its iron frame sheathed in gleaming bronze, every inch covered in intricate designs that shimmered despite centuries underground. This wasn't just a piece of armor, it was a royal proclamation, a physical manifesto of power worn on the head of someone who commanded armies and shaped kingdoms. The helmet's craftsmanship is staggering. Copper alloy plates, thinner than a coin, were painstakingly riveted together, their surfaces alive with interlacing beasts and geometric patterns, a visual language meant to convey divine authority. But the real clue to its owner's status lies in the Latin inscription etched along the brow. In the name of our Lord Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God. This wasn't just decoration, it was a sacred invocation, the medieval equivalent of wearing a crown stamped with heaven's endorsement. Only kings or high-ranking nobles would dare claim such a direct link to the divine. The helmet's nasal guard, a slender strip of metal dividing the face, wasn't just for deflecting blows. It framed the wearer's gaze, forcing onlookers to meet his eyes as if confronting judgment itself. What's fascinating isn't just the helmet's luxury, but what it reveals about medieval identity. In a world without photography or portraiture, objects like this were a person's public image. When an Anglo-Saxon leader rode into battle or presided over court, this helmet wasn't just protecting his skull, it was broadcasting his lineage, his faith, his right to rule. The designs weren't arbitrary, they echoed the same motifs found in illuminated gospels and stone crosses, tying the wearer to a cultural renaissance where art and power were inseparable. Yet the York helmet also speaks to a darker truth, the fragility of kingdoms. Buried alone without accompanying grave goods or a body, its presence in a ditch suggests haste, perhaps hidden during the Viking siege of York in 866, when the city burned and its rulers fled. The very symbols meant to project invincibility became relics of a shattered order. That irony isn't lost on historians. The object designed to proclaim eternal authority ended up as a time capsule of collapse. Modern technology peeled back even more secrets. X-rays revealed repairs, tiny patches where the bronze had been meticulously mended. This helmet wasn't just a ceremonial showpiece, it saw combat. The dents and scratches, invisible to the naked eye, tell of battles fought and survived, a testament to the skill of metalworkers who could forge beauty that endured brutality. Today, the York helmet does more than dazzle museum visitors. It rewrites assumptions about the so-called Dark Ages. This level of artistry contradicts old stereotypes of crude barbarian warlords. The hand that shaped this helmet belonged to a culture with mathematical precision. Those interlacing patterns required geometric mastery and a deep understanding of materials. The bronze was alloyed to resist corrosion, the rivets spaced to distribute impact. Function and beauty weren't at odds, they were entwined. Perhaps most poignant is what the helmet doesn't tell us. We'll never know the name of the man who wore it, or whether he died in battle or betrayal. But that anonymity is itself a lesson. Power, no matter how gilded, is fleeting. The York helmet outlasted its owner's dynasty, his language, even his religion, to speak across 12 centuries. When you stand before it now, you're not just looking at a relic, you're meeting the gaze of a king whose world vanished, but whose legacy still gleams in the light. Buried in a small Danish village, the so-called Sealant Skull looks like something straight out of science fiction. Its elongated dome, an oversized eye socket so unusual that when it surfaced in 2007, whispers of ancient aliens spread like wildfire. But the truth, revealed by meticulous forensic analysis, is far more fascinating than any extraterrestrial fantasy. This skull wasn't the relic of a visiting star traveler. It was the handiwork of medieval humans who reshaped their bodies in ways that still make us pause today. The science behind cranial deformation is surprisingly straightforward, if unsettling to modern sensibilities. From infancy, when bones are still soft and malleable, a child's head would be tightly bound with cloth or strapped between wooden boards, gradually molding the skull into an elongated shape over months or years. It wasn't a quick process, it required patience, deliberate care, and likely some discomfort. But why would any culture subject their children to this? The answer lies in the powerful language of appearance. Across medieval Europe, parts of Asia, and even among the Maya and Inca, elongated skulls were markers of elite status, setting nobility apart from commoners as visibly as a crown. The Sealant Skull, with its precise symmetry and lack of trauma, suggests this individual wasn't just modified, they were cherished, their altered appearance a badge of honor. What's remarkable isn't just the practice itself, but how widespread it was. From the Huns who terrorized Rome to the aristocratic families of early France and Croatia, skull shaping crossed continents and cultures. Some scholars believe it mimicked the gods depicted in art, literally reshaping humanity to echo the divine. Others argue it functioned like a medieval barcode, instantly identifying tribal or familial ties. The Sealant specimen, found without accompanying grave goods, leaves its story partly untold, but its very existence forces us to confront how deeply medieval societies linked identity to the body. Yet the skull also reveals a darker truth, the pain behind beauty standards. Modern CT scans show the pressure of bindings sometimes caused mild brain deformation, though not necessarily impairment. Imagine the cries of infants whose heads were wrapped too tightly, or the social shame if a family failed to achieve the desired shape. This wasn't just fashion, it was a physical manifestation of societal expectations, as relentless as any modern ideal. Today, the Sealant Skull does more than fuel curiosity, it holds up a mirror to our own world. We may not bind infant skulls, but from foot binding to waist cinches, cosmetic surgery to extreme body modifications, humans have always gone to extraordinary lengths to fit cultural molds. The skull's greatest lesson isn't about aliens or even the Middle Ages. It's about the universal drive to belong, to stand out, or to conform, no matter the cost. When we stare into those hollow eye sockets, we're not seeing an outsider, we're seeing ourselves. Imagine holding a book so fragile that a single touch could reduce it to dust, yet inside, words penned 2,000 years ago still wait to be read. That's the paradox of the Herculaneum Scrolls, a library of Roman texts carbonized by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. Buried under 20 meters of volcanic mud, these scrolls weren't just preserved, they were frozen in time, their ink sealed beneath layers of blackened papyrus like insects in amber. For centuries, they were considered unreadable until modern technology began peeling them open without even touching the pages. The breakthrough came with a technique called X-ray phase contrast tomography, a mouthful even for scientists. Here's how it works. Powerful synchrotron rays pass through the tightly wound scrolls, detecting subtle differences in density where ink once clung to the papyrus. Advanced algorithms then reconstruct these shadows into legible letters, like deciphering a message through fogged glass. The results have been astonishing: lost works of philosophy, previously unknown poems, even early drafts of texts we thought we knew by heart. One scroll revealed a previously unknown treatise by the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus, his musings on morality and pleasure surviving against all odds. But why should medievalists care about Roman scrolls? The connection lies in the fragility of history. Most medieval manuscripts survived because they were copied and recopied by monks in scriptoria, their contents deemed worthy of preservation. But what about the works that didn't make the cut? The scrolls of Herculaneum offer hope that even texts lost to time might still be recovered, especially from places like medieval monasteries, where fires or damp might have carbonized or sealed away documents in ways similar to Vesuvius' eruption. Imagine finding an original draft of Beowulf or a lost chronicle from the Crusades, hidden in some forgotten corner of a crypt. The technology developed for Herculaneum is already being adapted for medieval finds. Multispectral imaging, for instance, can resurrect faded ink on parchment, revealing erased palimpsests where monks scraped away older texts to reuse precious vellum. In one stunning case, this technique uncovered hidden mathematical proofs in a medieval prayer book, proofs that traced back to Archimedes, thought lost forever. The Herculaneum scrolls proved it was possible to read the unreadable. Now, that same optimism is being applied to fire-damaged medieval manuscripts. their brittle pages no longer a death sentence for the words they hold. There's poetry in the fact that a volcanic disaster became a time capsule. Vesuvius didn't just destroy Herculaneum, it sealed its library like a letter to the future. The scrolls are a reminder that loss isn't always permanent, that beneath layers of ash or centuries of neglect, voices from the past might still be waiting for us to listen. As these technologies improve, who knows what other doors might creak open? The next breakthrough could come from a cathedral archive, a castle's collapsed cellar, or even a bog like those that preserved the Grobel man. The past has always been talking. We're finally learning how to hear it. Beneath an ordinary parking lot in Leicester, England, a team of archaeologists uncovered a grave that would rewrite the story of one of history's most infamous kings. The skeleton, crammed into a hastily dug trench with no coffin or shroud, bore the unmistakable marks of a violent end, a skull split open by a blade, vertebrae twisted by scoliosis, and even the ghostly imprint of a dagger thrust through the ribs. This wasn't just any medieval casualty. DNA tests confirmed the impossible. These were the bones of Richard III, the last Plantagenet King of England, lost for over 500 years. The discovery was more than a historical footnote, it was a reckoning. For centuries, Richard had been painted as a villain straight out of Shakespeare, a hunchbacked usurper who murdered his nephews in the Tower of London. But his skeleton told a different story. The curvature of his spine, while severe, wouldn't have given him the grotesque hump of legend. His wounds, analyzed by forensic experts, revealed he'd fought fiercely at Bosworth Field, dying helmetless and surrounded by enemies, a far cry from the cowardly schemer of Tudor propaganda. Even the indignity of his burial spoke volumes. Tossed into a grave too small for his frame, his hands may have been bound, a final insult from the victorious Henry Tudor. Yet the most startling revelation wasn't about how Richard died, but how he lived. Isotope analysis of his teeth traced his childhood movements, matching historical records of his upbringing in Northumberland. His bones showed signs of a high-protein diet fitting for nobility, but also the wear of years spent in armor. This wasn't a monster, this was a man, one whose physical pain from scoliosis would have been constant, yet who still led charges into battle. The so-called cursed tomb humanized a king reduced to caricature, forcing historians to confront the biases woven into the past. The Greyfriars dig did more than solve a cold case. It exposed how history gets written by the winners. Henry Tudor's dynasty had every reason to blacken Richard's name, just as Richard himself likely smeared his rivals. Archaeology became the ultimate fact-checker, separating Tudor spin from biological truth. Even the location of the grave, beneath what became a municipal parking lot, felt like poetic justice. A king once celebrated with chantries and monuments now lying under asphalt, until science gave him back his voice. Today, Richard's reconstructed face gazes calmly from museum displays, a far cry from the snarling portraits commissioned by his enemies. His reburial in 2015 in a Leicester cathedral drew crowds and controversy. Some still see him as a murderer, while others champion him as a wronged ruler. But the real lesson of the Greyfriars' tomb isn't about taking sides. It's about how often history hides in plain sight, waiting for the right tools and the right questions to set the record straight. Who knows what other maligned figures might be waiting, bones humming with untold stories beneath our feet. In the soft clay of a Norwegian farm in 1904, workers struck wood where no trees should have been and uncovered one of the most extravagant funerals the Viking Age ever produced. The Oseberg ship, a 22-meter-long vessel carved from oak, lay buried like a sleeping giant, its prow still coiled with serpentine carvings so vivid they seemed ready to slither from the wood. But the real shock came when archaeologists peered inside. Beneath a mound of earth and stone, two women rested on a bed of luxury, surrounded by treasures that blurred the line between history and legend. The sheer opulence of their grave goods defies imagination. 14 horses, 6 dogs, and even 2 oxen had been sacrificed to accompany them into the afterlife, a menagerie of companionship and utility. Exquisitely carved wooden carts, their wheels fitted for a journey beyond death, stood ready alongside richly decorated sledges. Textiles woven with gold thread clung to chests filled with personal items, combs of antler, delicate bronze brooches, even a bucket bearing an Irish design, proof of Viking raids reaching far beyond Scandinavia. But it was the ship itself that stole the show. Every inch of its surface rippled with intricate carvings of beasts and vines, a floating gallery of Norse artistry. This wasn't just transportation, it was a floating palace, a vessel fit for the gods. Who were these women, buried with such fanfare? Forensic analysis revealed one was in her 70s or 80s, an extraordinary age for the time, her bones showing signs of arthritis but also a lifetime of good nutrition. The other, younger, bore traces of a broken collarbone that had healed poorly. Their identities remained debated, a queen and her daughter, a high priestess and her acolyte. The presence of a wand carved with runes hints at possible magical rites, while a small ivory figurine, possibly representing Freya, goddess of fertility and power, suggests deep religious significance. What's clear is that these weren't mere passengers. They were women who commanded respect so profound their community sent them into eternity with every comfort they'd known in life. The Oseberg burial forces us to rethink Viking society. Popular culture paints them as bearded warriors obsessed with battle, yet here was a monument celebrating female authority, artistry, and spiritual might. The ship's craftsmanship alone reveals a culture capable of staggering sophistication, its planks fastened with iron nails. Its sail, now long decayed, likely dyed in bold patterns to announce its approach. That such a vessel was consigned to the earth, never to sail again, speaks volumes about Viking beliefs. Ships weren't just tools, they were sacred, worthy of becoming tombs for the elite. But the Oseberg find also holds darker mysteries. Recent studies suggest the older woman may have died from a rare cancer, her remains showing skeletal lesions consistent with the disease. Was her burial a desperate attempt to appease gods who'd failed to heal her? And why was the ship's stern violently hacked apart before burial, its rudder and other elements deliberately damaged? Some theorize this was ritual killing of the ship to release its spirit, while others suspect political turmoil, a hasty burial during unrest, or even a deliberate desecration by rivals. Today, the Oseberg ship stands reconstructed in Oslo's Viking Ship Museum, its serpent head looming over visitors as if frozen mid-roar. The women's bones, too, have stories yet to tell. Advances in DNA analysis may one day reveal their origins, kinship, or even traces of their final meals. Until then, their tomb remains a haunting reminder. The Vikings weren't just raiders, they were poets of wood and wave, believers in an afterlife so vivid they built bridges to it plank by plank. When you stand before those carved beasts, you're not just seeing art, you're witnessing a love letter to the dead, written in the only language they knew would last 1,000 years. Tucked away in a Yale University library, a book unlike any other mocks our attempts to understand it. The Voynich Manuscript, named after the Polish bookseller who acquired it in 1912, is a 240-page mystery written entirely in a script no one has ever deciphered. Its pages crawl with alien-looking plants that don't match any known species, naked women bathing in elaborate green pools, and astrological charts swirling with unreadable symbols. For 6 centuries, this book has dared cryptographers, linguists, and even wartime codebreakers to crack its secrets, and all have failed. What makes the Voynich so maddening isn't just its undecipherable text, but the eerie precision of its design. Statistical analysis reveals its words follow linguistic patterns akin to real languages, with recurring characters and syllable structures. The illustrations, though bizarre, are meticulously detailed. Someone clearly intended this book to mean something. Early theories speculated it was the work of a Renaissance con artist like Edward Kelly, who duped royalty with fake alchemical secrets. But radiocarbon dating silenced those doubts. The vellum pages were made between 1400 and 1438, decades before Kelly's birth. This wasn't a hoax, it was a genuine medieval artifact, its purpose lost to time. Recent breakthroughs have only deepened the puzzle. In 2019, a scholar noticed that the manuscript's herbal section might encode actual plants, just drawn through the lens of medieval symbolism. One bulbous root, long dismissed as fantasy, bears striking resemblance to a Mexican sunflower species, suggesting the author had knowledge of New World botany before Columbus. Even more startling, artificial intelligence trained on hundreds of languages tentatively identified the text as a form of encoded Hebrew, though human experts remain skeptical. Could this be a medical compendium from a Jewish physician fleeing persecution, his knowledge disguised to protect it, or perhaps a dying language's last testament, its speakers vanished without a trace? The manuscript's very existence forces us to confront how much history isn't just lost, it's unknowable. We're used to medieval mysteries with eventual solutions, like the Rosetta Stone cracking Egyptian hieroglyphs. But the Voynich resists. Its pages might hold revolutionary herbal remedies, heretical cosmic theories, or even mundane household accounts. We'll never grasp what terrified or inspired its author to pour such effort into a book no contemporary could read. Yet in that frustration lies a gift. The Voynich manuscript is a humbling reminder that the past isn't a puzzle to be solved, but a conversation we're only half hearing. Every undeciphered word whispers the same truth. History isn't just what survives, it's what lingers just beyond our reach, tantalizing and eternal. Somewhere in those inked lines, a medieval mind still speaks. We've yet to learn how to listen. In a quiet field near the Irish village of Balantoba, archaeologists uncovered a grave that stopped them mid-dig, not for its treasures, but for its tenderness. 2 skeletons lay entwined in an eternal embrace, their bones intertwined so intimately it seemed impossible to separate them even after centuries in the earth. The man's arm curled protectively around the woman's shoulders, her face tilted toward his collarbone as if whispering a final secret. For a moment, the team hesitated to disturb them, struck by the sheer humanity of the scene. These weren't just bones, they were a love story written in calcium and cartilage. Forensic science peeled back the layers of their tragedy. Both skeletons bore brutal wounds, the man's skull fractured by a blunt weapon, the woman's ribs marked by the telltale slice of a blade. They hadn't died peacefully in each other's arms, they'd fallen together in violence, possibly during a raid or local skirmish. Isotope analysis revealed they'd grown up in the same region, their bones steeped in the same soil and water. Were they husband and wife cut down defending their home, siblings shielding one another? The chemistry couldn't confirm their relationship, but the way their bodies curled together spoke louder than DNA ever could. What makes the Balantoba pair so haunting isn't just their pose, but what it reveals about medieval grief. Whoever buried them, likely friends or family, had arranged their limbs with care, ensuring they'd remain connected in death as they'd been in life. In an era where mass graves were common for battle casualties, this deliberate tenderness stands out. The grave held no weapons or valuables, just two people who mattered enough to someone that their bond was preserved against time's indifference. Theories about their identities swirl like the mist over Irish bogs. Some scholars suggest they could be victims of the Bruce invasion in the early 14th century, when Scottish and Irish forces clashed in a bloody struggle for independence. Others point to older conflicts, perhaps Viking raids that terrorized coastal communities. But the truth is, their story transcends any single war. They represent the countless unnamed souls who lived, loved, and died in the shadow of larger historical events, people whose lives rarely made it into chronicles but whose humanity lingers in the earth. Modern visitors to the site often leave flowers near the excavation area, a silent tribute to emotions that feel startlingly contemporary. That's the power of the Balantoba Skeletons. They collapse the distance between past and present. When you look at their embrace, you're not seeing medieval casualties. You're seeing panic, devotion, the instinctive reach for comfort in the face of unimaginable fear. Their grave isn't just an archaeological find, it's a mirror. After all, isn't this how we'd want to be remembered? Not as dates or footnotes, but as people who held on to each other when the world turned dark. The irony is poignant. In an age obsessed with kings and conquests, it's these two anonymous figures who have endured in our collective memory. No castle or crown could convey the Middle Ages more vividly than their tangled bones. They remind us that history isn't just shaped by armies and treaties. It's forged in the quiet, desperate moments between ordinary people, the kind that rarely leave a trace. Except this time, against all odds, they did. Hidden beneath the altar of Siena's San Francesco church for centuries, a simple iron nail sparked a devotion so intense it shaped the destiny of a city. Discovered during renovations in the 1400s, this so-called holy nail was said to be one of the very nails that pierced Christ's hands or feet during the crucifixion, a fragment of the true cross itself. Whether genuine or not, its impact was undeniable. Medieval Siena didn't just venerate this relic, they built their identity around it, turning a sliver of metal into a spiritual lightning rod that drew pilgrims, funded wars, and even influenced architecture. The nail's journey to Siena reads like a medieval thriller. According to local legend, it was smuggled from Constantinople by a daring merchant as the Byzantine Empire crumbled, concealed in a shipment of ordinary goods to evade thieves and rival cities. When it arrived, the relic transformed Siena overnight. Processions carried it through streets lined with weeping devotees, its presence believed to halt plagues and bless harvests. The city's famed black and white marble cathedral, already a masterpiece, added a special chapel just to house it, a physical declaration that Siena now held a direct line to the divine. But here's where history gets messy. Dozens of European churches claim to possess true crucifixion nails, some even displaying multiple examples. Science can't confirm the Siena nail's age or origin, but forensic analysis reveals intriguing details. The iron's composition matches Roman-era metallurgy, and microscopic wear patterns suggest it was handled reverently for centuries. What's undeniable is the nail's social power. In an era without banks, relics like this were currency, spiritual capital that could secure loans, forge alliances, or justify military campaigns. When Siena went to war with Florence, priests brandished the nail before troops, promising God's favor to those who fought beneath its shadow. The nail also exposes medieval Europe's complex relationship with authenticity. Modern minds might scoff at the idea of so many true relics, but medieval believers operated on a different logic to them. Faith wasn't diminished by duplication. Each nail became genuine through the miracles it inspired and the communities it united. A 14th century Sienese chronicle recounts how the nail bled when touched by a heretic, a proof that satisfied contemporaries far more than carbon dating ever could. Yet the nail's legacy isn't just about blind faith. Its story reveals how objects could shape politics. When Siena's government collapsed in the 1350s, the nail became a rallying point for civic pride, its annual display drawing crowds that transcended class divisions. Artisans crafted elaborate reliquaries to hold it, their designs fusing Gothic elegance with emerging Renaissance realism, a visual manifesto of a city straddling two eras. Even the act of hiding it during renovations speaks volumes. This wasn't just a sacred object, but a treasure worth risking eternity to protect. Today, the nail still rests in its chapel, though the fervor has faded. But if you press your hand against the cool glass of its display case, you're touching more than iron. You're touching the pulse of an age where heaven and earth felt inches apart, where a city's fate could hinge on a sliver of metal, and where belief, true or not, could move more than mountains. It could build cathedrals. The Codex Gigas isn't just a book, it's a medieval monolith, its massive leather-bound pages stretching nearly 3 feet tall and weighing as much as a full-grown man. Known as the Devil's Bible, this colossal manuscript could crush a modern bookshelf under its sheer bulk, yet every inch of its vellum is filled with meticulous script and vivid illustrations. The legend behind its creation is the stuff of midnight whispers. A disgraced monk, condemned to be walled alive for breaking his vows, struck a bargain with the devil to finish the work in a single night. In exchange, his soul, of course, and perhaps the most infamous portrait in medieval art, a full-page depiction of Satan himself, grinning from ear to ear amid a crimson hellscape. What's fascinating isn't just the myth, but the reality behind the labor. Modern analysis suggests the Codex was the work of a single scribe, toiling for decades, not hours. The uniformity of the handwriting, the consistency of the ink, these betray no supernatural haste, only human endurance. Imagine the calligrapher's hand cramping as he filled each page with Latin texts, his candle guttering in the gloom of a Benedictine scriptorium. The book's contents are as eclectic as its dimensions. The complete Vulgate Bible sits alongside Josephus' histories, medical treatises on herbs and healing, even a calendar for tracking saints' days. This wasn't just a holy book, it was a one-stop shop for medieval knowledge, a portable university between covers. But it's the devil in the details that steals the show. The infamous full-page illustration of Satan isn't some hidden blasphemy tucked in the margins. It's displayed boldly, opposite a heavenly city, as if to taunt readers with the choice between salvation and damnation. Art historians note the devil's unnerving posture, squat and frog-like, his claws curled around a spear, his green-tinged skin clashing with the fiery background. This wasn't just a warning, it was a psychological weapon, a visual reminder of the stakes of sin. Yet the same book contains delicate prayers and healing charms, a paradox that captures the medieval mind's duality, deeply pious yet obsessed with the supernatural lurking just beyond the church walls. The Codex's survival is its own miracle. It weathered fires, wars, and the looting of Prague by Swedish troops in the 30 Years' War, when it was hauled off as spoils alongside cannons and crown jewels. For centuries, it languished in a royal library, its spine cracking from neglect until conservators intervened. Today, digitized pages allow us to zoom in on the scribe's errors, a skipped line here, an ink blot there, a proof that even the so-called Devil's Bible was made by human hands, flaws and all. What lingers isn't just the spectacle of its size, but the question it forces us to ask: why create something so impractical? In an age when books were rare and precious, the Codex Gigas was a statement. Perhaps it was meant to awe, to embody the glory of God through sheer physicality. Or maybe, like the monk in the legend, its maker sought immortality, not through a pact with the devil, but through the unshakable weight of parchment and ink. When you stand before it now, you're not just seeing a book, you're seeing ambition made tangible, a monument to the belief that words, no matter how heavy, can outlast the hands that wrote them. Beneath the quiet fields of Gamla Uppsala in Sweden, a grassy hillock hides a secret that rewrote our understanding of early medieval kingship. When archaeologists carefully peeled back the layers of the so-called King's Mound, they uncovered more than just bones. They found a throne room for the dead. The warrior buried here wasn't just laid to rest. He was sent into eternity with a king's ransom of treasures, each object whispering of a society where power wasn't just claimed, but performed. Gleaming swords with hilts wrapped in gold filigree, glass drinking horns from distant Rhineland workshops, even a set of board game pieces carved from elk antler. Every item was a calculated display of status, meant to impress both mortal visitors and the gods themselves. The gaming pieces might seem like trivial grave goods at first glance, but their inclusion speaks volumes. In Norse culture, strategy games weren't mere pastimes. They were tests of intellect and foresight, essential skills for any ruler. The presence of a full set suggests this king's subjects believed he'd need his wits in the afterlife, perhaps to outmaneuver spirits or counsel Odin himself. Nearby lay the skeleton of a hunting dog, its collar studded with bronze, a loyal companion for the afterlife's endless hunts. But the real showstopper was the jewelry, brooches inlaid with garnets so precisely cut they must have come from Constantinople, proving this Scandinavian king's influence stretched across trade routes spanning continents. What makes the King's Mound extraordinary isn't just the wealth, but the ritual behind it. The burial wasn't a private affair, it was a public spectacle. Soil analysis reveals the mound was built in stages, each layer added after grand feasts where mourners left offerings. Animal bones and shattered drinking vessels litter the site. This was theater on an epic scale, a community literally raising earth to immortalize their leader. The mound's location wasn't accidental either. It anchors a sacred landscape, aligned with two other massive burial hills to form a triangle visible for miles, a permanent claim on the land that outlasted dynasties. Yet for all its grandeur, the grave holds poignant mysteries. The king's skeleton shows signs of old battle wounds, including a partially healed sword slash across one femur. Had he earned his status through combat, or was this an aging ruler clinging to power? Isotope testing of his teeth suggests he traveled extensively in youth, possibly as a mercenary or diplomat before settling to rule. And then there's the curious absence of a crown. No such item was found, hinting that early medieval rulership might have relied more on symbols of warrior prowess than regal headgear. The mound's greatest lesson is one of silent propaganda. In an era before written chronicles, these burials were the history books, their contents carefully curated to shape memory. By interring their king with such lavish care, his people weren't just honoring him, they were crafting a legend. Every pilgrim who later climbed the mound to pay respects would feel the weight of that legacy in their bones. Today, as visitors stand atop the grassy swell, they're not just looking at a grave, they're standing on a stage where history and myth collide, where a forgotten king's presence still looms large enough to cast shadows 16 centuries long. In the muddy banks of the River Usk in Newport, Wales, construction workers in 2002 stumbled upon an unexpected silhouette beneath their bulldozers, the ribs of a massive wooden ship, its timbers blackened by centuries of burial. The Newport Ship, as it's now known, wasn't just another wreck. It was a time capsule of 15th century maritime brilliance, preserved so meticulously that the builder's chisel marks still scored its beams like yesterday's work. This ghost from the age of exploration predates Columbus's famed voyage by decades, a reminder that Europe's seafaring ambitions didn't begin with the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. What sets this vessel apart isn't just its age, but its craftsmanship. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, revealed its oak planks were felled between 1440 and 1460, meticulously shaped with axes and adzes rather than saws. The shipbuilders used a hybrid technique, blending clinker construction, overlapping planks for flexibility, with carvel-style framing smooth hulls for speed, a design choice that allowed the ship to weather Atlantic swells while carrying heavy cargo. This wasn't some cobbled-together fishing boat. It was the medieval equivalent of a luxury liner built to cross oceans. But here's the mystery. Why was such a prized vessel left to rot in a riverbank? The ship's skeleton bore clues. Its hull showed signs of disassembly, not wreckage, but deliberate dismantling, as if someone had cannibalized its timbers for other projects. Some theorize it was part of a fleet commissioned by Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, whose naval campaigns during the Wars of the Roses might have left ships abandoned. Others point to its cargo capacity, suggesting it hauled Welsh wool to continental markets before age or damage relegated it to a watery grave, the most tantalizing possibility. This ship might have been a pioneer in an overlooked chapter of exploration. 15th century Bristol merchants were already probing the North Atlantic, searching for mythical islands like High Brassel. Could the Newport ship have been part of these early ventures, testing routes that would later lead to the New World? Its design shares features with Portuguese caravels, the workhorses of later explorers, hinting at a network of shared knowledge stretching from Wales to Iberia. Yet the ship's greatest gift isn't its unanswered questions, but its testament to everyday marvels. Buried beneath a modern parking lot before its discovery, it underscores how much history hides in plain sight, not in exotic locales, but under city streets and suburban backyards. The Newport ship doesn't just connect us to the age of exploration. It whispers that the past is never truly gone, just waiting for the right moment to surface. When you walk Newport streets today, you're treading on layers of stories still half told, where every shovel strike could unveil the next forgotten masterpiece. Amber has always been more than just fossilized tree resin to medieval Europe. It was sunlight trapped in stone, a golden treasure carrying the whispers of ancient forests. While the legendary amber room of 18th century Prussia was lost during the chaos of World War II, fragments of similarly crafted medieval amber artifacts survive, offering glimpses of a luxury so radiant it bordered on the divine. Picture holding one of these palm-sized relics, warm to the touch, swirling with honeyed hues, its surface carved with intricate scenes of hunting parties or mythical beasts. These weren't mere trinkets, they were status symbols worn as pendants by nobility or set into altars where candlelight would set them ablaze like captured fire. The journey of these amber pieces is as fascinating as their craftsmanship. Geological analysis traces their origins to the Baltic coast, where storms still churn up fragments onto beaches today, a phenomenon medieval traders exploited. From there, amber traveled along routes that connected Viking longships to Byzantine markets, passing through the hands of Norse merchants, Slavic middlemen, and Italian dealers. A single piece might have been bartered for furs in Novgorod, traded for silks in Constantinople, and finally polished into a bishop's crozier in Cologne. The material's value wasn't just in its beauty. Its electrostatic properties, rubbing amber generates a charge, made it seem magical, a quality that fueled both scientific curiosity and superstition. What makes these fragments particularly poignant is their connection to the Amber Room's legacy. Though the room itself was a later Baroque masterpiece, its roots stretched back to medieval amber working traditions. Artisans in 14th century Lübeck and Bruges had already perfected the art of piecing together small amber panels with heated honey and iron clamps, a technique that would later allow the Amber Room's vast mosaics to shimmer like liquid gold. The surviving medieval fragments, some no larger than a coin, demonstrate this same painstaking craftsmanship, each one a microcosm of the lost chamber's grandeur. Beyond their aesthetic allure, these artifacts reveal a startling truth about medieval globalization. Chemical signatures in amber from Polish church relics match deposits near modern-day Kaliningrad, while amber beads found in English graves bear tool marks characteristic of Baltic workshops. This wasn't haphazard trade. It was a sophisticated network spanning languages, religions, and political borders. The material's path mirrors the spread of ideas too. Baltic amber crosses found in Hungary blend pagan symbolism with Christian iconography, showing how cultures adapted shared treasures to fit new beliefs. The bittersweet irony, while war and time erased the Amber Room, these humbler fragments endured precisely because they were small enough to be overlooked. Tucked into reliquaries, sewn into hemlines, or lost in middens, they survived the pillaging of cities and the shifting of dynasties. Today, they challenge our perception of the Middle Ages as a dim interlude between empires. Held to the light, a medieval amber pendant doesn't just glow, it illuminates an era of astonishing connectivity, where a substance formed 40 million years ago could bridge continents, inspire art, and outlast kingdoms. The Amber Room may be gone, but in these golden shards, its spirit still flickers. Beneath the floorboards of medieval English cottages and tucked into the walls of ancient taverns, archaeologists keep uncovering something peculiar: small glass or ceramic vessels filled with rusted nails, bent pins, and most startling of all, traces of human urine. These so-called witch bottles weren't discarded trash. They were carefully concealed weapons in a spiritual arms race, crafted to repel curses, deflect malevolent spirits, and trap witches in their tracks. The practice peaked during the 16th and 17th centuries, a time when fear of the supernatural bled into daily life. But the roots of these charms stretch back to much older traditions, revealing a shadow world of folk magic thriving alongside official religion. What makes these bottles so fascinating isn't just their contents, though the inclusion of urine and sharp metal certainly grabs attention, but the logic behind them. Medieval and early modern people believed witches could attack from a distance, sending illness or misfortune through invisible channels. A witch bottle acted like a supernatural lightning rod. The theory went like this: when a witch's curse came calling, the bottle's urine, thought to carry the victim's essence, would lure the dark magic inside, where the nails and pins would shred it to pieces. Some bottles even contained heart-shaped pieces of cloth or hair, physical stand-ins for the person being protected. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a form of sympathetic magic, a tangible attempt to control forces that felt terrifyingly real. The bottles also exposed the quiet resilience of pagan traditions under Christianity's surface. Though the Church condemned witchcraft, its rituals couldn't always ease the anxieties of rural life. When a cow stopped giving milk or a child fell ill, people turned to solutions that blended Christian prayer with older practices. Excavated bottles have been found with crosses scratched into their surfaces or buried near thresholds, a nod to both faith and folklore. In some cases, the vessels were even hidden in chimneys or under hearths, gateways between the human and spirit worlds. This wasn't rebellion against the Church, it was pragmatism. If holy water could bless a home, why not hedge your bets with a bottle of nails? Forensic archaeology adds another layer to the story. Residue analysis reveals some bottles contained not just urine, but vinegar or wine ingredients likely chosen for their preservative qualities, as if the maker understood the bottle needed to last spiritually. Others held tiny scrolls inscribed with prayers or curses. Though the ink has often faded beyond reading, the care taken in their creation suggests these weren't acts of desperation, but deliberate rituals passed down through generations. Some bottles were even crafted during specific moon phases, timed to harness celestial power. The witch bottles force us to reconsider how medieval and early modern people navigated fear. In an era without germ theory or modern medicine, illness and misfortune demanded explanations and solutions that science couldn't yet provide. These vessels weren't just about warding off witches, they were about reclaiming agency in a chaotic world. When you hold one today, you're not just holding a relic of superstition, you're holding hope distilled into glass and iron. Proof that even in the darkest moments, people fought back with whatever tools they had. And sometimes those tools were as simple as a jar of nails and a prayer whispered into the dark. For centuries, historians believed the crown of Saint Wenceslas, the sacred symbol of Bohemian kings, had been lost to war and rebellion. Then, in 1848, workers repairing a wall in Prague's St. Vitus Cathedral made a discovery that sent shockwaves through Europe. Tucked behind crumbling mortar lay an iron chest, and inside, gleaming as if newly forged, rested the crown itself. This wasn't just a royal accessory, it was a masterpiece of medieval goldsmithing, its gold band studded with sapphires, rubies, and pearls, topped by a cross said to contain a thorn from Christ's crucifixion. The survival of this crown borders on miraculous, hidden not once, but repeatedly during centuries of upheaval, its very existence a defiance of time. The craftsmanship alone takes your breath away. Weighing nearly 2.5 pounds of solid gold, the crown was designed to sit heavily on a ruler's brow, a physical reminder of the weight of kingship. Its 12 symmetrical panels, adorned with biblical scenes in enamel, were revolutionary for their time, blending French Gothic elegance with Slavic motifs. But the true marvel lies in the spindles, massive crimson stones mined from what's now Afghanistan, their journey to Central Europe tracing the Silk Road's sprawling trade networks. One gem alone, the so-called rubellite, weighs nearly 250 carats, its deep pink hue symbolizing the blood of Saint Wenceslas, Bohemia's martyred patron. This wasn't just jewelry, it was geopolitical theater, every stone whispering of alliances, conquests, and the church's blessing. Yet the crown's greatest drama lies in its brushes with oblivion. During the Hussite Wars of the 15th century, radical reformers sought to destroy all symbols of idolatry, including royal regalia. Legend claims the crown was smuggled from Prague in a grain sack, hidden in castles and crypts for decades. 200 years later, as Swedish troops ransacked Bohemia during the 30 Years' War, it vanished again, this time into the cathedral's very walls. The fact that it survived at all speaks to the desperation of those who guarded it, people who risked their lives to preserve not just an object, but the soul of a kingdom. What's often overlooked is how the crown mirrors Bohemia's turbulent identity. Created in 1346 for Emperor Charles IV, it embodied his vision of Prague as the heart of a new Holy Roman Empire. But the same crown later became a pawn in power struggles between Czech nobles, Habsburg rulers, and Protestant rebels. When Protestant nobles briefly placed it on the head of Frederick of the Palatinate in 1619, the Habsburgs responded by melting down other Bohemian regalia, a deliberate erasure of dissent. The crown's survival makes it one of the few tangible links to a fractured past where politics and faith were inseparable. Today, the crown resides in a vault opened only for rare state occasions, its 7 keys held by 7 different officials, a tradition dating back to Charles himself. Replicas can't capture the aura of the original. You'd miss the nicks along the gold where anxious hands once pried open the chest, or the faint scent of myrrh still clinging to the lining from centuries of anointing oils. It's a relic that refuses to become a museum piece, still pulsing with the ambitions, fears, and devotions of those who fought to keep it. When you stand before its display, or more likely, a photograph of it, you're not just seeing a crown. You're seeing the light glancing off the same gems that once caught the eye of emperors, the same gold that rested on the brow of a kingdom perpetually torn between defiance and devotion. On Palm Sunday in 1461, beneath a sky heavy with late winter snow, the fields near Toten became a slaughterhouse. The Battle of Toten, the bloodiest engagement ever fought on English soil, left behind a grim testament in the earth, mass graves so densely packed with skeletons that archaeologists initially mistook them for ancient foundations. When researchers began carefully lifting the bones from their muddy tomb, the sheer brutality etched into each fragment told a story no chronicle could capture. Decapitated skulls rested beside cervical vertebrae still bearing the clean slice of a blade. Forearms snapped mid-bone from desperate attempts to block sword strikes. One skeleton's pelvis had been split vertically, the wound so precise it could only have come from a halberd's downward thrust with enough force to cleave a man in two. What makes Toten unique isn't just the scale of violence. Some estimates suggest 28,000 died, but the forensic window it offers into medieval combat's intimate savagery. Unlike romanticized tapestries of noble knights clashing in single combat, these bones reveal warfare as it truly was, chaotic, frenzied, and horrifically efficient. Many skeletons show butterfly fractures on their skulls, the result of repeated blows from poleaxes or maces that first cracked the bone outward, then caved it inward. Others bear defensive wounds on their left arms, suggesting right-handed attackers overwhelmed them in close quarters. The absence of arrow wounds tells its own tale. This wasn't a battle fought at range, but a grinding melee where men bludgeoned each other for hours until the snow turned red. The graves also dismantle myths about medieval chivalry. Several skeletons belong to older men in their 40s or 50s, likely seasoned men at arms who should have been ransomed for profit under so-called knightly codes. Instead, they were butchered alongside teenage archers whose skeletal growth plates hadn't yet fused. Isotope analysis adds another layer of tragedy. Many combatants weren't local conscripts but mercenaries from distant regions, their teeth carrying chemical signatures of childhoods spent in Wales or Scotland. These were professionals who fought for pay, not crowns or causes, only to end up in anonymous pits. Perhaps the most haunting discovery was the Toten 28, a group of skeletons clustered together at the grave's edge. Forensic anthropologists determined they'd been executed post-battle, their skulls fractured from behind by blunt instruments. Historical accounts suggest these might have been Lancastrian stragglers, hunted down and dispatched after Yorkist victory turned into rout. The bones don't just record death, they document the moment a battle became a massacre. Toten's legacy lingers not just in graves but in collective memory. For centuries, farmers plowing those fields unearthed shattered weapons and human fragments, whispering of the day England tore itself apart. Today, the skeletons serve as a corrective to sanitized histories, reminding us that medieval warfare wasn't pageantry, it was trauma writ large on the landscape. When you stand on that quiet Yorkshire hillside now, you're not walking through a historic site. You're walking across a wound that never fully healed. Tucked behind a false wall in Prague's historic center, a discovery in 1984 revealed a room frozen in time, a medieval alchemist's laboratory, its wooden shelves still cluttered with glass retorts, ceramic crucibles, and parchment scrawled with symbols that dance between recipe and incantation. This wasn't just a workspace, it was a portal into a mindset where science and magic weren't opposites, but two sides of the same shimmering coin. The air here must have once been thick with the scent of mercury and burnt herbs, the flicker of furnace light casting shadows that turned ordinary men into seekers of the extraordinary. The tools left behind tell a story of relentless experimentation. Curved alembics for distilling liquids, their necks blackened from repeated use. Mortars stained with vivid pigments, verdigris green, vermilion red, hinting at attempts to replicate the hues of nature or perhaps craft counterfeit gems. But the most tantalizing artifacts are the notes, their pages brittle with age. Some entries read like straightforward chemistry, instructions for purifying salts or extracting essences from plants. Others descend into arcane shorthand, invoking planetary alignments or cryptic phrases like, "The green lion devours the sun," a reference not to mythology, but to alchemical codes for chemical reactions. This duality captures the essence of medieval alchemy, a discipline that sought to transmute lead into gold while also pursuing the transformation of the human soul. What's often misunderstood is how these pursuits weren't mere superstition. The Prague Lab's glassware mirrors designs found in early pharmacies, and many of its techniques of distillation, calcination laid groundwork for modern chemistry. The same hands that scribbled spells might have stumbled upon discoveries like mineral acids or alcohol purification. Alchemists were the era's boundary pushers, operating in a gray zone where intuition and observation collided. When they heated mercury or dissolved gold in aqua regia, they weren't just chasing mythical philosophers' stones, they were cataloging reactions that later scientists would systematize. Yet the lab's shadows hold darker whispers. Residue analysis on some crucibles detected traces of toxic metals like arsenic and antimony, substances alchemists believed could prolong life if properly purified. Recipes for aurum potabile drinkable gold suggest some practitioners ingested their experiments with fatal consequences. The line between remedy and poison blurred in their quest, a reminder of how perilous innovation could be without the guardrails of modern ethics. The room's very existence also speaks to alchemy's precarious status. Hidden behind a wall, it hints at secrecy necessary in an era when the Church eyed such practices with suspicion, and rulers like Emperor Rudolf II vacillated between patronage and paranoia. Some alchemists were celebrated, others were hanged for fraud when their promised transmutations failed. The Prague Lab's survival suggests its owner was either discreet or lucky, his work interrupted before authorities could intervene. Today, this space challenges our smug distinctions between rational science and primitive magic. The alchemist's quest to unravel nature's secrets and harness its power wasn't so different from modern goals. Their methods may seem mystical now, but their hunger to understand the material world echoes in every lab today. When you peer into one of their glass vessels, you're not just seeing an old tool. You're seeing the birthplace of curiosity itself, where the impossible was just an experiment away. The sea didn't take horse, and all at once it stole the village piece by piece, one storm after another, until nothing remained but skeletal walls and the echoes of lives uprooted. Perched on the Devon coast of England, this once thriving fishing community met a fate that feels unnervingly modern. In 1897, dredging offshore for construction materials destabilized the seabed, stripping away the natural barrier that had protected haul sands for centuries. By 1917, the village was unrecognizable, Houses dangled over crumbling cliffs, their foundations gnawed by waves, and by 1924, the last resident fled. But what the sea took, it also preserved. When archaeologists began excavating the ruins, they uncovered a time capsule of coastal life frozen in its final moments. The details are hauntingly intimate. A child's wooden toy boat, half-carved, lay abandoned in what had been a kitchen. Iron fish hooks and tangled nets spoke of livelihoods tied to the unpredictable sea. Most poignant were the floor's uneven flagstones worn smooth by generations of footsteps, now tilting at grotesque angles where the ground had given way. These weren't just artifacts, they were fragments of a community's rhythm, abruptly silenced. Unlike Pompeii's volcanic snapshots, Wholesand's decline was slow enough to taste. Diaries from the last residents described nights listening to the cliffs crack like gunfire, knowing each tide brought them closer to the edge. Yet Wholesand's story isn't just one of loss, it's a masterclass in human adaptation. Before the dredging, villagers had already engineered ingenious defenses. Seawalls cobbled from local stone, houses built with their backs to the wind, even a shared warning system where lookouts would ring a bell at the first sign of storm surges. These weren't passive victims, they were problem solvers fighting a battle they couldn't win. When the sea finally breached the village pub, the social heart of Wholesands, the community didn't scatter. They regrouped uphill, building makeshift shelters and petitioning the government for aid. Their resilience mirrors today's climate refugees, from Louisiana's disappearing bayous to Pacific islands swallowed by rising tides. Parallels to modern crises are impossible to ignore. Wholesand's destruction wasn't purely natural. It was accelerated by human activity, much like today's coastal erosion worsened by rising sea levels. The dredging operation that doomed the village was authorized without understanding its consequences, a stark reminder of how short-term gains can unravel centuries of stability. Yet there's a crucial difference. Wholesands had no satellite imagery to predict the threat, no climate models to sound the alarm. Their ignorance was born of limitation. Ours is often willful. What lingers isn't just the tragedy, but the choices we inherit. Wholesands ruins now serve as an open-air classroom, where geologists track erosion rates and schoolchildren sketch the skeletal walls. The village legacy isn't just a warning, it's proof that adaptation is possible, but only if we listen to the past before the waves drown out its voice. Standing on those crumbling cliffs today, you can almost hear the bell that once rang to warn of storms, its echo a question: how many more villages must vanish before we learn? In the dim recesses of a German monastery's storeroom, a scrap of fabric no larger than a handkerchief rewrote history. Woven with threads so fine they seemed spun from sunlight, this fragment of medieval silk bore patterns of phoenixes and peonies, motifs unmistakably Chinese in origin. How did a 12th century Bavarian monk come to possess such a treasure? The answer unravels across continents, revealing a world far more connected than we ever imagined. These threads weren't just decorative, they were the pulse beats of the Silk Road, the sprawling network of trade routes that ferried luxury and lore between Asia and Europe centuries before Marco Polo's famed journey. The sheer distance these textiles traveled boggles the mind. Imagine camel caravans laden with bolts of silk inching across the Taklamakan desert, their precious cargo changing hands at bustling Samarkand markets before Venetian merchants bartered for them in Constantinople. Each transfer left invisible marks, Persian dyes tinting Chinese silks, Byzantine gold thread embroidering Indian cottons. But it wasn't just fabrics that made the journey. Nestled beside them in merchant packs were spices that would redefine European cuisine: pepper from Kerala, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, cloves from the Moluccas. A single peppercorn could fetch its weight in silver, making spice chests medieval safes for flavors worth fortunes. What's revelatory isn't just the presence of these goods in Europe, but what they reveal about cultural exchange. A 14th century Italian painting might depict the Virgin Mary draped in Chinese patterned silk, while excavated London cesspits yield traces of ginger and turmeric in working-class diets. Globalization wasn't invented in the boardrooms of the 20th century. It thrived in the holds of Dehouse and the saddlebags of Sogdian traders. The artifacts tell silent stories of adaptation, two Middle Eastern weavers copying Chinese motifs for customers who'd never seen the Yangtze, or European dyers improvising with local plants when indigo shipments stalled. Yet the real game-changer was silk's dual role as currency and status symbol. Kings used bolts of it to pay armies, while the church draped altars in imported silks to awe congregations with heavenly splendor. A single surviving inventory from Burgundy's court lists over 600 silk garments, their origins spanning from Hangzhou to Damascus, but this trade wasn't one way. European woolens, Baltic amber, and even glassware flowed eastward, turning the Silk Road into a dialogue rather than a delivery route. The spices whispered darker truths as well. Their astronomical value fueled wars, inspired colonial ambitions, and bankrolled exploration. When Vasco da Gama rounded Africa's tip in 1498, he wasn't seeking new lands, he was chasing the source of the cinnamon and pepper already gracing European tables via overland routes. The Silk Road didn't just connect cultures, it set the stage for empires. Today, these fragments of spice-stained ledger from Genoa, a child's silk cap preserved in permafrost, force us to rethink medieval Europe as anything but isolated. In a world without maps or emails, merchants, monks, and monarchs built networks that spanned hemispheres, proving that even then, people would cross deserts and oceans for a taste of the exotic. The next time you sprinkle pepper on your meal, remember, you're seasoning your food with a legacy that's been traveling for over 1,000 years. Buried beneath the flagstones of Pontefract Priory, the skeleton known as the Black Monk tells a story written in violence. When archaeologists unearthed the remains, they found fractures radiating across the skull like cracks in shattered glass, blunt force trauma so severe it suggested a death both brutal and deliberate. But the mystery deepened when forensic analysis revealed something even more unsettling. Some wounds showed no signs of healing, indicating they occurred at or near death, while others bore the ghostly traces of old injuries long mended before this final encounter. Was this a monk cut down in a moment of rage, or a man who survived one attack only to meet a grislier fate later? The Priory's records offer no answers, only tantalizing silence where a name should be. Medieval monasteries were meticulous documenters of their dead, yet this man appears in no burial register, no chronicle of misfortune. His anonymity fuels the legends that swirl around Pontefract, where locals whisper of a spectral figure roaming the ruins, his robes rustling with the sound of unfinished business. Some claim he was a rebellious brother punished for heresy, others a victim of political intrigue during the tumultuous years before Henry VIII dissolved England's monasteries. The truth may be simpler and darker. Monastic life wasn't always the peaceful retreat we imagine. Behind cloistered walls, tensions flared over power, property, and piety. Accounts from other monasteries speak of brawls in chapter houses, poisonings in refectories, even clandestine burials to hide scandal. The Black Monk's injuries align eerily with medieval punishment methods, skull fractures consistent with a heavy object like a censer or crucifix swung in fury. Yet the absence of defensive wounds raises another possibility. Was this a post-mortem mutilation, a deliberate desecration meant to deny him peaceful rest? Folklore and forensics collide in the monk's twisted bones. Local tales speak of a curse tied to the priory's foundation, invoking a shadowy figure who vowed vengeance from beyond the grave. Meanwhile, isotope analysis of his teeth hints at a childhood far from Yorkshire, perhaps even overseas, suggesting a traveler or pilgrim who found danger instead of sanctuary. The most chilling detail, soil samples from his grave contain traces of quicklime, a substance used to hasten decomposition or to keep something from rising. What makes the Black Monk more than just a ghost story is what he reveals about the fear woven into faith. In an age where the afterlife was as real as the stones beneath one's feet, disturbing a burial wasn't just crime, it was cosmic defiance. Whether he was a sinner, a martyr, or simply a man in the wrong place, his bones force us to confront the shadows lurking behind stained glass and illuminated manuscripts. The past isn't just written in ink and vellum. Sometimes it's etched in fractures and quicklime, waiting for the light to crack it open. On the windswept coast of Norfolk, England, the crumbling walls of St. Mary Magdalene Hospital whisper a story that defies stereotypes about the Middle Ages. Founded in the 12th century, this wasn't just another religious institution. It was a sanctuary for society's most feared outcasts, leprosy patients. When archaeologists excavated the site, they uncovered bones that bore the unmistakable marks of Mycobacterium leprae, the bacterium that slowly devours nerve endings and cartilage. Skeletons showed hands clenched into claws from atrophied muscles, faces with collapsed nasal cavities, and feet so damaged the victims likely walked on raw bone. But the real revelation lay not in the disease's brutality, but in the care etched into every corner of this place. The hospital's design spoke volumes about medieval pragmatism mingled with compassion. Patients lived in individual stone cells not as punishment, but to prevent cross-infection, a rudimentary understanding of contagion centuries before germ theory. Yet these weren't bleak dungeons. Each cell had a small garden plot, and the chapel's acoustics were engineered so the bedridden could hear Mass through open windows. Grave goods buried with the dead personalized rosaries, well-worn shoes, suggest residents kept belongings rather than being stripped of identity. Even more telling, the cemetery showed no evidence of hasty burials. Bodies were laid east-west in Christian tradition, some with flowers placed beneath their heads, proving these souls were mourned, not just disposed of. Forensic science peeled back deeper layers of resilience. Dental analysis revealed diets rich in fish and dairy, far better than the peasant gruel of the era. One male skeleton, his spine twisted by advanced leprosy, showed healed fractures from what was likely a fall, proof someone had tended him through years of disability. The bones also held surprises about the disease itself. DNA extracted from the remains matched strains still found in modern red squirrels, hinting at a zoonotic leap that medieval people couldn't have comprehended but unknowingly mitigated by keeping patients separate from wildlife. What truly shatters assumptions is the hospital's location. Leprosariums were often banished beyond city walls, but St. Mary's stood prominently near a bustling port. Pilgrims en route to Canterbury would stop to donate alms, touching relics through specially designed holes to avoid contact while still offering charity. This wasn't mere segregation. It was a carefully negotiated dance between fear and duty, where the faithful could uphold Christian charity without risking infection. The hospital even issued its own currency, lead tokens exchanged for goods, allowing residents to participate in the local economy without handling coins that might spread panic. The final irony, as the Black Death ravaged Europe in the 14th century, leprosy rates mysteriously plummeted. Some researchers now theorize that the genetic mutations that made some people susceptible to leprosy may have conferred resistance to plague. The very outcasts medieval society shunned might have carried biological advantages they never lived to see. Today, St. Mary's ruins stand as a monument to humanity's capacity for mercy in the face of terror. These walls didn't just house the sick, they bore witness to the stubborn truth that even in the darkest times, compassion leaves its fingerprints, and sometimes those fingerprints linger long enough for us to find them centuries later, etched into bone and stone. These remarkable discoveries don't just belong to history books, they're fragments of lives just as vivid and complex as our own. Every rusted sword, every hastily buried relic, every carefully inscribed manuscript speaks with voices we're only beginning to understand. The medieval world wasn't some shadowy prelude to modernity. It was a kaleidoscope of ingenuity, brutality, faith, and resilience. Think about the Viking warrior woman of Birka, her bones rewriting centuries of assumptions, or the plague victims of London, buried with dignity in the midst of chaos. These aren't artifacts behind glass, they're mirrors reflecting back our own humanity across the centuries. What makes these finds so compelling isn't just their age, but the way they shatter stereotypes. We imagine the Middle Ages as a time of stagnation, yet the Staffordshire hoard's intricate goldwork rivals modern jewelry, and the Voynich Manuscript's unsolved codes remind us how much we still don't know. These discoveries reveal a world buzzing with trade routes stretching from Wales to Afghanistan, with scientific curiosity bubbling in alchemists' labs, and with emotional bonds, like the embracing skeletons of Balantoba, that feel achingly familiar. The past wasn't simpler, it was just as messy, ambitious, and contradictory as our own era. The thrill of archaeology lies in its unpredictability. Who would have guessed that a parking lot in Leicester hid a king, or that a farmer's field in Sweden concealed a ship fit for Norse gods? Every trowel of dirt overturned could rewrite a chapter of history. Right now, somewhere, another team is brushing soil from a long-lost wall, or scanning the earth with ground-penetrating radar, poised to uncover the next revelation. Maybe it's a peasant's diary preserved in a bog, or a forgotten chapel's frescoes hidden beneath whitewash. The stories aren't finished, they're waiting. So what's your role in this unfolding mystery? Hit like if these discoveries left you as awestruck as we were, and subscribe to join us on the next excavation into history's hidden corners. Drop a comment below. Did the Winchester Reliquary's spiritual power move you, or were you chilled by the anti-vampire burials of Drosko? Share which artifact made the medieval world feel most real to you. Until our next adventure together, keep looking closer. The past is everywhere, sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment to whisper its secrets.